Welcome, you all. We are so glad to have you for today's session, Culture at Work, How to Foster Resilience and Sustainable Work for Teams to Thrive. These are such interesting times, and we have an amazing team to talk about this important discussion. So let me have them introduce themselves first. Joe, would you mind introducing yourself first, who you are and what you do? We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tracy. I'm Joe Ryder. I'm an executive vice president and chief people officer for Stericycle. Our company has 16,000 team members around the world where we provide safe and sustainable and responsible products and services for organizations, which really protect the health and well-being of people in the communities. So I'm excited to be on today's event with you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Christine?
Hi. Hello, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here. I work for Verizon, and we employ close to 130,000 employees globally and offer wireline, wireless, and network solutions. I am the Senior Vice President and Chief Talent and Diversity Officer, which means I'm responsible for all hiring, all learning, all career development, succession planning, and DEI for the organization globally. Thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. And Gleb, how about you?
Well, I'm really excited to be here among such prestigious colleagues, and this is really fun. I'm looking forward to it. My name is Dr. Gleb Sapursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, a consultancy which helps tech and finance industry executives drive innovation, collaboration, and retention in hybrid work. I published books like 7 best-selling books, including Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams. I write regularly for venues like Harvard Business Review, Fortune, Entrepreneur, Fast Company, and I work and consult for tech companies, finance companies, ranging from Aflac to Xerox. So that's my background.
Wonderful. Thanks to each of you. And I'm Dr. Tracy Brower. I'm the Vice President of Workplace Insight for Steelcase, a global organization, and I am an author as well. My latest book is called The Secrets to Happiness at Work, and I'm a contributor with Forbes.com and Fast Company and other publications as well. So we are absolutely thrilled to have you all and talk about this really important topic of culture. Gleb, I wonder if we could start with you, and we'll hear from each of the panelists on this one, because I think it's just a great way to set the stage. How would you define resilient culture? Gleb, we'll start with you.
The main aspects of resilient culture for me is a culture that's able to bounce back from challenges. So to have a good, healthy culture means knowing what the culture is about. It's not leaving it up to chance. It's deliberately constructing your culture so that it's aligned with the goals of your organization, which for companies, of course, would be making profit. So you want to create a culture that's going to be really aligned with those goals. And culture is going to be the differentiator, the competitive advantage of each individual company. And for a culture to be truly resilient, you want a culture that's able to bounce back from challenges like this right now, where many companies are experiencing a challenge with figuring out their return to the office, and they're facing what I call the 4 horsemen of the required return to office. They're facing issues around retention, non-compliance, they're facing issues around diversity, and they're facing issues around culture. So a good culture would be one that's able to survive this major challenge of returning to the office and figuring out what that's about, able to survive Great Resignation and all of these challenges in a healthy way, and able to bounce back from whatever challenges the external world throws at it, as well as the internal world of each company.
Brilliant. So helpful. Christina, I wonder if you could weigh in. I love your comments, Gleb. There's so many challenges now, and it's surviving and thriving and moving forward. Christina, how would you characterize a resilient culture?
Yeah, I appreciate and absolutely agree with everything Gleb said. I see it every day. I think adding to that, there is a consistent learning and interest in learning that I think is also a significant part of a resilient culture. Knowing how to fail and knowing how to succeed and having the muscles to do both We work for amazing organizations, and oftentimes the memory and the muscle of what it was like to not win or to not succeed is something we've got to remind and coach people on how to do that. I also think that there's an element of trust. I think there's an element of empowering employees to make a call, make decisions, test out things, maybe try things. I think that there's a balance of being planful and focused, and then at the same time not being so stuck and rigid to that plan that you aren't agile and reacting, responding, and adjusting as needed. And then I think finally, there's a clarity around our organizational purpose. What are your non-negotiables? And clarity around shared goals and what the organization is aiming to achieve, regardless of what role you play.
Wonderful. So helpful. That's terrific. I love your points, especially about learning and failure and how we need to really move forward from that. Joe, what would you add in terms of how you define a resilient culture?
Yeah, I really feel that a large part of these last 3 years, it's really about getting the adaptability, and enterprise-wide, organizational-wide, of what it is that we do as an organization to ensure that all of our team members throughout the globe are part of this opportunity to engage, to ensure that we're all rowing in the right direction, and understanding the challenges with COVID and inflation and staffing and cultural context. And it led into many of the comments that Gleb talked about, which is, the great resignation and returning to the office. And it's really been an exciting period of time, really, to connect with your team members and take the time to listen, right? I think a large part of it is really focused on, I call it, there's many people who have their MBA, and I like to call it, I have my MBWA. And you really have to get out management by walking around, and you have to get in front of the many different challenges and listen to your team members so that you can help ensure that the strategy and the initiatives that you're putting in place are truly being impactful to where it's needed within the business. And in the context of that, I think that's really a large part of where resiliency really lies and comes into play. And it's that connection and understanding and that opportunity to drive that throughout your organization to assist your customers to obviously grow in their space as an organization.
Wonderful. It's so much of a physical metaphor, right? Management by walking around, rowing. Christina, you talked about muscle so that we can respond to the kinds of challenges that you've all laid out. A question I have for you, and Christina, I'll start with you on this one, is all about sort of the adaptability piece. Joe, you were referencing, it's a perfect segue, but think about the kind of events over the last couple of years, and I'm wondering, what's your perspective on the shifts in culture that are necessary, or the evolution of culture? I mean, business leaders have been talking about culture forever, but what makes this different now? We'll start with you, Christina.
Yeah, I think we're in a very unprecedented time, and Joe kind of alluded to the stacked crises, the stacked elements of economy and humanity, and all of the things that we've gone through over the past couple of years and are still very much going through. I think that there's a higher bar set for corporations and the expectation of the role that the corporation plays in the world and society that's very different than ever before. And I think related to that is a call to go beyond diversity and inclusion and push towards equity, belonging. I think there's a well-being angle that has been pulled to the forefront like never before. I think that there also is this expectation of the blend of personal and professional, and organizations caring for both accordingly. And I think that the hybrid work idea for many organizations has been one that's been around, whether it be on the horizon or something that has slowly started to be part of the culture. And now it's the new normal. And we're still trying to figure out what those rules are of the new normal. And I think that there is an employee centricity and an employee power like never before that organizations are having to step up and do different than what's been done in the past.
Brilliant. Yeah, Joe, I'd love to hear from you on this as well. I think that power differential is fascinating, right? Even as the economy contracts, we know the labor market continues to be extraordinarily competitive. So, Joe, what's your perspective on all this?
It's caused a tremendous amount of challenges, right? Certainly from staffing and looking at, the high potential talent and the connections to your team members, recognizing what it is that we as an organization needed to do to get in front of, the resilience that we're trying to build in place. I think a large part of where we kind of landed as we migrated through our culture is we committed to a refresh of our values. And we really wanted to take a deeper dive as we connected to team members around the globe to truly understand the importance of culture today and how it continues to change slightly, and how as an organization you can get in front of that. And along that journey of really focusing on our strategy, our mission, and our values, we really wanted to take the time to understand how do we live them and how do we create that opportunity to connect with our team members, to understand more about these unique challenges today that they're faced with and how they can connect back to the company so that we can connect to our customers through our business units to ensure that we're delivering what is needed and necessary in the organization. Ultimately, it focuses on their purpose. And I truly feel as the CPO, as we continue to embed on that purpose-driven responsibilities within the organization and our team members, that focus to our customers continues to bring the right synergies of growth and guidance and reflection of responsibilities back to the team members of what they do each and every day.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, that alignment, that guidance, so important. Gleb, how are you thinking about the shifts or evolutions in culture that are necessary today?
My key focus is mindsets. So I come from a behavioral science background. I spent 15 years in academia researching how we think and how we feel. And the biggest challenge for adaptability, whether it's in the COVID world, whether it's in the 2008-2009 fiscal crisis, whenever we suffer a major disruption, is the fact that we are unable to change our mindsets effectively, quickly enough. Now, what would it look like if we came to our position where we are, not from where we currently have the inside perspective, but from an external perspective? What kind of decisions would we make differently? How do we think differently and feel differently about the situation? So, for example, I think Christina made really good points about learning. So, where organizations really need to learn to get ahead. But there's a big challenge for organizations in learning. One of these dangerous judgment errors, cognitive biases, what scholars like myself call cognitive biases, is called functional fixedness. Functional fixedness, it's kind of like the hammer-nail syndrome. When we have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. When we learn one way of functioning together, we tend to apply that way of functioning to all other contexts. And that's a big problem when you need to adapt to major disruptions, whether it's COVID, whether it's the return to the workplace, whether it's the fiscal crisis of 2008, 2009, whether it's the war with Ukraine and Russia, or plenty of other situations that will happen in the future. So this functional fixedness really impedes our ability to be able to change our behavior effectively. And I'll go back to a point that Joe made, let's say management by walking around. That is definitely useful when you're an office-centric company, but if you're shifting to a hybrid modality, that's less useful because you're managing people who are working partially or even sometimes full-time remotely, and you're not able to see them by walking around. And so that tendency to only use that modality of management by walking around, relates to another cognitive bias called the status quo bias, where we tend to stick to the status quo, what we're comfortable with, what's intuitive to us, even though the situation for leading hybrid teams calls for a really different modality. And so that's what we really need to recognize. When we need to adapt to a situation, we need to address the status quo bias and functional fixedness in order for us to succeed in adapting our culture to new situations.
Tracy, I would
Go ahead.
like to build on that a little bit, because I do think that the role of the leader is changing as a result of what Gleb had mentioned. We expect our leaders to be brilliant managers. We expect them to get the basics right around management, as well as inspire and motivate and coach. Now we're expecting a creativity and the way that they engage and the way that they're situational with employees like never before. We're expecting them to be community builders that has a digital element to it. Community, whether you're in person or you're not present, and the expectation around how you bring your group together and carry that culture is very different, and an expectation of leadership now. I think there's also a bit of empathy and realness that is expected that maybe is different than in the past, and showing up as human and with vulnerabilities and with errors and failures and truthfulness around being their whole selves too. And I think all of that is added on to the already weighty and high expectations of the role leaders play historically. So I couldn't agree more that the evolution of all of this plays out, especially in leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. And leaders end up being a microcosm for culture, right? Like their behavior tends to get magnified because they're under a leadership laser. And so they can be such a cue for culture, and their behavior becomes such a cue for others. Let's stay with that leadership conversation another minute. Joe, Gleb, anything you'd like to add in terms of the shifts that you see happening in leadership and the way that leadership needs to shift over time, given all that we've been through?
Yeah, I think there was a tremendous focus, right, that we had to do as an organization, where we shifted, in early 2020, a number of team members to work from home, right? Then we had to really get in front of the leadership to help them understand how do they manage differently in a virtual world. And we put together a number of, small workshops to assist in the understanding, that it shouldn't always be, a WebEx or a Zoom meeting, with 10, 15 people on your call all the time. This is where that management by walking around in a virtual sense really can take place in a one-on-one world, right? Where you really take the time to understand how that specific team member is responding to the number of challenges and uniqueness that is taking place today in their lives. That we have to really focus on mental health and well-being of our team members, and really taking that, realization and listening to them of how is this process truly working? What can we do better? How can we listen and respond better with empathy and understanding? And that's a large part of this shift that really took place, right? If I went to my CEO, Cindy Miller, back in 2020 and said, hey, I want to take 6,000 team members and I want to have everybody work from home, for a year and a half, she probably would have thought I was crazy. And I probably wouldn't be working here yet today. But it was a great experiment for all of us to go through to understand, how do we change? How do we be more flexible? How do we make ourselves more visible, in the day-to-day world and environment? Here within Stericycle, we have amped up our communications. So our CEO, Cindy Miller, does a weekly communication to all of our team members so that they can understand and connect deeper with what's going on within the organization, the challenges, take time to recognize team members globally throughout the world as we continue to, march forward, in the many difficult situations that we continue to face with. And it's really becoming a great opportunity to understand more from, as a leader, how I can be more flexible, how I can understand more about my humility that needs to take place as a leader, so that I can get deeply connected in a much better scale with each of my team members to understand what they need as well.
Wonderful. You know, there was a really interesting study that was just done, and it talked about the extraordinary worry and anxiety that people have about all the world issues. But one of the bright spots in the study is that many people and leaders said that they were feeling a greater bond with each other going through some of these challenges. So I love the points that you're both making. Gleb, anything you want to add in terms of the shifts that leadership needs to go through and the ways that leaders need to shift over time?
Definitely. I want to build on the points that Joe made about humility. I think this is something we don't talk nearly enough about in business, being humble, because that's not what leaders are taught. They're not taught to be humble. They're not taught to be empathetic, to go to what Christina was saying. They're taught to be decisive, show confidence, and just go with their intuitions. And when you look at the research, that's fine when you're in a stable and unchanging environment. But when we're talking about the world of today and tomorrow, we're clearly not in a stable and unchanging environment. We are very much in a context of disruption. So this is a time when leaders should not trust their intuitions. They should not go with their gut. In fact, I wrote a book about this called Never Go With Your Gut, which focuses on how do you make good decisions in a time of transition. And we are definitely experiencing a time of transition, of change, of disruption. So leaders really need to be taught to be humble about their intuitions. They need to be taught to be humble about what they're feeling and the equation between their feelings and intuitions and what is actually true. Because we tend to fall into what's called the confirmation bias, one of these other cognitive biases, where we tend to look for information that confirms our beliefs and ignore information that does not. And that's a very dangerous error that leaders tend to make, especially in a time of change and transition. So we really need to watch out for that. We need to teach leaders to not trust their intuitions and to look at the data, the hard data, and make decisions based on that. So that's one point on dynamic. The other dynamic, I think, is I want to talk to what Christina was saying about empathy. And I think I want to draw a distinction between the top leadership and the middle level managers. So what I'm seeing right now in my clients is that there's a challenge where the workers tend to, and going back to, let's say, return to the office, workers tend to want to spend more time working from home. And indeed, people are overall about 9% more productive working remotely. So they're saying, well, I'm productive working remotely. Why do I need to get back to the office? We see top level leaders, on the other hand, calling for workers to get back to the office because the leadership is concerned about, well, how can we I don't know how to manage in a context where my workers are remote. I want them to be in the office where I know how to manage and I'm comfortable managing in that setting. And we see that, so that's the top level leaders. And we see middle managers kind of caught in the middle. They're trying to impose some kind of return to office mandate while also making sure that they're not losing great talent. So the four horsemen I mentioned before: retention, non-compliance, culture challenges, and so on. So this is a big challenge. And I think we want to be careful when we're talking about leaders to figure out which kind of leaders we're talking about, because the top level leadership is really different than the mid-level management. And we need to be empathetic to the mid-level management. I usually work with the top leadership, we need to be, and I teach them that we really need to be empathetic to the mid-level management, because if we're not sufficiently empathetic to them, well, all the research shows that the people who are most stressed in companies are actually the mid-level managers, the people who are experiencing the most burnout, the ones who are most likely to resign from a company and be part of this great resignation. So really don't want to lose your mid-level management. And that's really important, to be empathetic toward them and support them with what they need.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Yeah, I'd really like to stay with that topic of talent and culture as a differentiator and kind of really talk a second about how we think about that. There was some articles recently in the popular press that had employees pushing back and saying, well, culture is really a euphemism for all the things that leadership and organizations and companies get. And it's not really about me or benefits to me. And so I'm curious, from your perspectives, we talk about culture as a differentiator. We talk about the way that culture can differentiate and influence for talent engagement and development and attraction and retention. Joe, can I start with you on this one? In what ways do you think of culture as a differentiator for the experience we're creating for talent?
First off, I would say that when we look at Stericycle's culture today, I would say that the safety is the foundation of everything that we do as a bedrock to our culture. And safety is really focusing, allowing that team member to ensure that they go home safely each and every night. That's where the focus is. And by doing so, we created a stop work authority opportunity for all of our team members. That if they see a situation that occurs and they feel that it's unsafe, they have the authority to stop that work immediately. They can talk to their supervisor or manager about it, and they can work together to alleviate that issue and concern to ensure that that team member can and will go home safely at the end of the night. Our CEO, Cindy Miller, has really been focusing on, the reporting and the engagement of our team members, amping up safety improvement committees, listening deeper into the situations and the concerns, and how do we continue to get in front of some of those challenges that we're faced with to ensure that our team members obviously go home at the end of the night safely. And then we've modeled that with a new defensive driving program. We actually were recognized by the Brandon Hall Group for recognition of our safe driving defensive program in 2021. And in spite of that, is what you do is you put together task force so that you have non-management and management coming together and understanding more of what the situation is, so that that's the bedrock of your culture as well. The collaboration, the learning, the engagement, and really the understanding of what it is that we're trying to do, right? Ultimately, at the end of the day, our promise, our brand promise is we protect what matters. And that is a huge brand promise when you're talking to your team members, when you're talking to your customers, when you're looking at the environment and sustainability play that comes into place of what we do each and every day, because it impacts the community, it impacts everybody here on Earth. And it's a great opportunity when you think about what differentiates the culture is where it starts. And I truly feel that when it starts with that collaboration and that unity and that opportunity to listen, that's where you really get the uniqueness that we're committed as an organization. We're united as an organization, and we're listening to the values of our team members so that they can understand more of their purpose and the responsibilities that they bring to the table. That's the exciting piece.
Yeah, that's so exciting. And purpose is significantly correlated with happiness. I love your points about brand as well. I always like to think that brand and culture are the outside in look at a similar set of characteristics versus being two completely different things. They're inside out, outside in. Christina, I want to bring you into this as well. How do you think about culture as a differentiator for talent, attraction and retention, engagement, development? How do you think about that one?
Yeah, I believe in the statement that culture is truly a differentiator. We've hired already year to date close to 25,000 people. And in a lot of those recruiting conversations, the reason people choose us time and time again is because of the elements of culture that they experience through getting to know us and us getting to know them. Where you have offers or choices to leave and go somewhere else at equally exciting companies, equally exciting jobs, similar pay and benefits. Often what makes people choose to stay or choose to join are the experiences they have with the people, the experiences they have with what they see and what they read and what they hear from a communications perspective. How we show up in our employees, how we show up in the way that we care for crises, the way that we run towards a crisis, the way that we are super transparent and communicative, both internally and externally, I think is huge for culture. We have, similar to how Joe mentioned, we have more touch points with the top few hundred leaders. We have more touch points with the masses of our employee audience. We, unlike other organizations, put outside what we put inside as far as all employee communications. We've got a news channel called Up to Speed that happens weekly that you can see if you are an employee or if you're not. I will say, as an HR professional, that makes me nervous sometimes, but I also do believe it's who we are to kind of share who we are, what we do, so that there aren't any surprises about what's meaningful and important to us. I think that ramping up communications is important. I also think the way that we reward and reinforce our employees and the behaviors of leaders is also important. And so as we think about an organization that is now very much a hybrid organization, we believe that mandates don't work for us. We believe that we want people to come into the office when it matters. And during those moments that matter, we want to be a magnet, not a mandate. And then we also recognize that we have work to do to create those culture moments to bring people together, both remotely and in person. And then the final piece I would say, because I do think the way that we reward and the way that we reinforce performance is important. This notion of performance does not equal in person, and this notion that performance and success does not mean that you were present is also very important to the way that we practice what we preach in a meaningful way.
Yeah, such great points. I would love to actually move us there. You all have all referenced hybrid work and working differently and working at a distance. And so I would love to make sure that we sort of go there now. And Gleb, I'd like to start with you on the answer to this question. I'm curious, as you think about keeping people aligned, keeping people connected, keeping them engaged, how do you do that effectively from a distance? How do you do that effectively in a hybrid world that we are all now part of? Can I start with you on that one, Gleb?
Of course. Well, I like to teach my clients about the 3 A's: awareness, authenticity, and alignment. So this is really important for culture more broadly, but especially in a hybrid and remote setting. So awareness means helping your employees be aware of what the future holds. When you look at the surveys of what employees want to know, they want to know what the future is going to be like for their company and for their position, for what's going on with them. And many companies are still not in that situation where they're helping employees be aware, and they're also not necessarily listening to employees. I've come in to work with clients who haven't done a survey on hybrid and remote work and how it's going for their staff for the 2.5 years of the pandemic, which is not great. And so that is a lack of awareness of what employees are feeling and thinking, and a lack of awareness of what's going on in the future. Now, the second thing I teach my clients is alignment. And I want to go back to what Christina was mentioning about rewards and incentives. So rewards and incentives are how a culture, an organization aligns its ways that it motivates employees with the behaviors of each employee. And that's especially important in a hybrid and remote context, because the ways that employees behave are much less visible to the organization. And so a lot of leaders tend to feel suspicious. When you look at, let's say, Microsoft recently came out with a report saying that over 50% of leaders experience what's called productivity paranoia. Productivity paranoia, meaning that they're paranoid that their workers aren't working when they're not in the office and when they can't stand over their shoulder and look at them, to put it crudely. So that is a big, big problem, because it shows that your culture has a lack of trust. If you can't trust your employees to work, why are you hiring these employees, right? That means that there's a fundamental problem in your culture. If you're not trusting your employees to work when they're not working in the office, that means that your incentives and your accountability mechanisms are not set up correctly. So that's a big problem. And the third thing I want to talk about is authenticity. So the employees need to feel that leaders are being authentic, that they are being truthful, and that they're not doing things just for their personal benefit. Where many leaders, when you're thinking about hybrid work, remote work, and let's say someone who says, well, I want to give my team members lots of flexibility, but they must be in the office 5 days a week. I've heard top leaders, you can see quotes in the news of top leaders saying exactly that. And that is a big, big problem when there's an obvious hypocrisy and misalignment between what leaders are saying and what's actually happening on the ground. So that is a big problem, again, especially in hybrid and remote work contexts where there are less touch points between leaders and their team members. And it especially puts those middle managers, who I think we need to be careful about differentiating from the top leadership, it puts them in the middle, trying to address these issues around awareness, alignment, and authenticity in a way that puts a lot of pressure on them. So you want to make sure to protect those middle managers from that pressure that causes them to have more burnout than rank and file staff or top level staff.
Mm-hmm. Great points in terms of how those are especially important today in a hybrid context and in a hybrid reality for sure. Joe, can I get you to weigh in on this one as well? What do you think about keeping people aligned and connected and engaged when you're in a hybrid reality?
Yeah, I'm in the office today. I walked in and I got an apple from my administrative assistant, who this weekend drove her family up to Milwaukee, and went out into the apple orchards and picked some apples and brought some back to the office. I think that's a great piece of connectivity, right? That I get to do that periodically when I'm in the office. And when I'm not in the office, in my one-on-one conversations that I have with my team members, and I always have conversations with people who report directly to me, but I also do it with those that are indirect as well throughout the world. And I always like to start the meeting just to say, how are you doing? And it's not an offhanded, question. It is one that I really want to focus on them and what they're facing and the uniqueness of what's going on within the context of their job and their responsibilities, of what can we pull apart to determine how we can better service you in light of what you're facing today. And I think that's the uniqueness that we all have to really stay connected to, whether you're working from home, whether you're in a hybrid model, whether you're in the office. I think we're also focusing on what do we want that office experience to truly be, right? When we want team members to come to the office, we really want them to ensure that they're connected through the culture and what is taking place, that we want them to feel part of this living entity and breathing organization of Stericycle, supporting the environment. And I think that's the one thing that we have to constantly take a look at is, how do I connect to this apple? How do I ensure that when I'm in the office that I'm taking that time to listen and understand with empathy and assurance of support for our team members? And I truly feel that it's a journey. And it's one that we have to constantly understand, and we have to communicate, and we have to talk about. And we have to set up those small group meetings just to understand how do we get better. And I think as we continue to peel that back, I think that our culture becomes even stronger and much more aligned with what it is that we're trying to do with being united. And it's really exciting to see this change, truly take place in an organization at Stericycle.
Yeah, beautiful. I love your symbol of the apple and thinking about how we really do value connections. And that is such a symbol of the way that we connect. So Christina, let me go to you just briefly before we get into some closing statement. How are you thinking about alignment in a hybrid world?
So I think that Gleb and Joe both mentioned something that is super important, and that is the keep a pulse on your employees. Whether it be ongoing surveys, we do them quarterly. We also have pulse surveys as well. I think the notion of don't forget to actually just talk to people too and ask them how they're feeling, what they need. We've done a significant amount of good old-fashioned roundtables with leaders at different levels, just getting together with employees and asking them for feedback and understanding a bit differently, directly, what's working and what's not. I think that there's also getting the balance of structure for hybrid, right, with what's flexible and offers autonomy. So you have to have policies, you have to have training, you have to have tools, you have to have support in order to do this right. But I also think that you can't go so far in that direction where you aren't, you know, offering the flexibility and the balance and the autonomy and the decisions that leaders have the ability to kind of make, and it's not so black and white. I think that that's really important. Moments that matter and bringing people together in person really do have to be opportunities to reinforce and remind the excitement of the culture and why people are where they are and where they choose to work. We believe that creating opportunities for volunteerism together, bringing our employee resource groups together in person are good ways to do that. We also have a very large portion of our population that aren't hybrid and are in our retail stores or in the field, and our leaders meet them where they are. And so making sure that regardless of what level you are in the organization, you are where your people are and you show up and you invest in that time spent, whether it's as a magnet and bringing people in or as depending on the way that you work, getting to them. I think that is really important. And then just kind of finally, I think we can't lose sight of the big picture, and the idea of hybrid work is intended to be a blend of at work location and remote. And the reason it's intended to be a blend for all of the things we know about well-being and goodness for employees, but also it's choice for where you're best set up for your most productive day. And whether that be in the office or at home or somewhere else, I think we can't lose sight of the intent of this strategy.
Sounds great. Well, we are going to move to an extra special speed round. I would love to just get no more than one sentence from each of you as we sort of close out. We've had an amazing opportunity to talk about culture and leadership and how those are shifting as we move to a new world of work. So what's just one sentence you would leave us with? Some advice you have? Christina, let me start with you on that. Just one sentence you would leave the audience with.
I think remember that leaders are culture carriers, and to role model the new behaviors and new expectations that will evolve your culture.
Brilliant. Joe, how about you?
Take the time to listen, understand, what's important to each of your team members and how you can be transparent to understand how you can support them and really the uniqueness and the challenges that we're faced with today.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Gleb, how about you?
The crucial thing in making good decisions about culture is mindset, and you need to make sure to have an external perspective and adjust those cognitive biases that I mentioned before, the confirmation bias, functional fixedness, status quo bias, because otherwise you really won't be able to adapt to our increasingly disrupted world and the future of work.
Brilliant. Oh, thanks to each of you. These are such interesting times, right? Like when things are upside down and inside out, we could look at it and say, oh, this is a moment for absolute sort of letting go and giving up. But it's absolutely an opportunity for reinvention, for us to reset and reimagine. And culture will be a really important accelerant for a bright future. So super appreciate the comments from each of you today, your expertise, your perspectives, your experience. It's really, really terrific. So thanks to each of you. Thanks to all of you who have listened. And we look forward to a bright future together.